the States because Jack Teixeira, a member of the Massachusetts Air National Guard, as we've told you about, was arrested on suspicion of leaking hundreds of secret defence documents.
Yes, the 21-year-old has been charged in a Boston court on 2 counts under the Espionage Act as Washington reeled from the fallout of the worst leaks of US intelligence in at least a decade.
Well, let's talk to Anthony Shaffer, who can join us now. And it's really good to see you this morning, Lieutenant Colonel. Look, how concerning is this? President Biden in Ireland just yesterday, the day before, sort of shrugged it off, said, well, it's nothing too much to worry about. Is it?
It is. The fact that someone as young as he is, he's 21, was able to obtain a top security clearance and then obtain these documents. These documents are not easily to get, and they're not easy to get. When I was working inside the intelligence community, the information that is contained in those documents was very, very much protected. You would have to walk in, you'd have a folder, you would bring it in, they would look at it, they'd sign it, and you'd walk it back out. It was always very tightly controlled. And the fact that so much information that relates to current operations, boots on the ground, to include British boots on the ground apparently in Ukraine, that wasn't known before. The fact that the loss rate right now is about 7-1 in favor of the Russians. Again, that's not what we were told. So the fact is that there's so much information that was very much protected by the U.S. and NATO is now out, is indicative of the fact that somehow the security system in the Pentagon is deficient to the point of where it's laughable. I mean, these things should not have happened. And again, this kid is 17 years old in Massachusetts, which is nowhere near Washington. So a lot of questions have to be answered about how this happened.
Yes, certainly lots of questions. And of course, other countries, especially allies of the United States, will be asking questions. And they'll be asking, can they trust the US to keep their secrets?
It's a great question, Ellie. I looked at those documents and I recognized that the British had secrets exposed. Many of our allies did. And that's an excellent question. So the only thing I can say is when I served for 30 and a half years. We were very protective. And I advised when Mike Pompeo was the director of CIA, I advised him. I advised the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and we were able to protect critical information from public release. And I'm all for transparency. I'm a former whistleblower myself, but there's a distinct difference between giving out information of our allies to the public that can actually cause harm versus just gaining transparency about things which are not proper. And in this case, I think he's exposed a lot of secrets of our allies for no good reason at all. It's a very bad breach, to say the least.
Why do you think we do have this attitude now? I mean, there's been a number of cases in the United States, of course, over the last sort of decade or so, where there is a perception amongst the public, isn't it, that the big state, the deep state, are keeping these secrets, and we, the people, need to know every last bit of what is going on. Because, as you know, and as anyone actually with an ounce of common sense knows, the intelligence world requires secrecy. There are things going on that if it gets found out, it puts lives at risk. Why do you think that is just being sort of forgotten by a younger generation?
That's an excellent question. And as you point out, Stephen, this guy is very young. He's 21. I think it's a lack of concern by the fact that we haven't been in a war that requires diligence to the level of youth. I mean, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were not real wars. I mean, World War II was a real war. We had to mobilize. Everybody was in it together. Other wars like that, I think, really woke up the population and the need to keep security. I think the current generation has no sense of needing to protect things. And to your point, Stephen, the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, it has a life of its own. And indeed, I think there's things that need to be discussed. Again, I was a whistleblower on issues relating to 9/11 and the failures then. I went through the proper channels when it was able to testify. With that said, others do not seem to have the high regard for security or protecting the need for the state to have some things protected. I'm not quite sure how that is, but it is a generational thing, it seems, from my point.
Yes, certainly. So there will be questions of trust surrounding this leak.
Absolutely.
But the real effect here, one of the biggest, I'd say, is, of course, on Ukraine. I mean, they will have to change military plans as a result of this leak, won't they? I mean, there was talk in the leak about a spring offensive. That will all have to change.
So the fact that so many supplies are in deficit, we don't know. The United States does not know if we can supply everything they need. And most importantly, it acknowledges that the S-300 anti-air defense system that they have will be out of missiles by mid to late May. So there's significant intelligence that was provided openly to the Russians that now either confirm or refute some of the things they knew. Plus the issues regarding the Spetsnaz, the issues regarding Wagner, the issue that apparently that there's far more access to the Russian military clandestinely because of agents is now known to the Russians, and the Russians are going to go looking for those who are our spies. So, yeah, it does compromise a number of programs and assets who are probably going to end up dead based on what was released in this report.
Can I throw something totally random at you, Anthony?
Stephen, please, yes.
As a former Defence Intelligence Operative at the CIA, I've just started listening again. I do a lot of the audiobook thing, and I've just started the whole Jack Ryan series again, the great Tom Clancy and the Jack Ryan series. Is there any accuracy in that? Does the CIA operate in the way that it's portrayed in some of these books?
You ought to go on the internet and look at my Bond moment. I was actually I was in the International Spy Museum, Stephen, and my Bond moment is actually in the museum. You can Google Tony Shaffer, Anthony Shaffer, and my Bond moment comes up. And the answer is, yeah, there are actual Bond moments by a lot of folks. It's boring most of the time, but believe it or not, Stephen, the most accurate rendition of spying is actually Len Dayton. He wrote a series of books called Game, Set, and Match, Bernard Sampson. I highly recommend that book series. If you want to know what it's really like to be a spy, that's the most realistic spy anthology I've ever seen. There's boring times, there's exciting times. I wrote a book, Operation Dark Heart, that covered my time in Afghanistan. It's available in England. It sold very well there. It opens with me on an air assault with the U.S. Army Rangers, which is, an interesting way of starting a book. Through some of the things I did relating to other clandestine operations. So there is excitement being a spy. It can be very boring at times, though. But obviously, we all do our best to protect our secrets and do the right thing to protect our nations. Yeah, absolutely. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.